Sometimes it feels like many years of marriage give you the right to be completely certain about the person beside you. About their words. Their looks. About the idea that there can be no more secrets between you. That's what I believed. But back then, I didn't yet know that a single conversation was waiting for me, one that would change everything, and a choice whose consequences could not be undone. I was deceived by the person I least suspected in the world, the love of my life, my wife, with whom I had shared 23 years, and, of course, her lover of the past 4 years. We mustn't forget about him. This had just been confirmed to me by the fourth participant in our small 4-person game. Moments before I went into the restroom of the restaurant where we were and vomited my lunch. After that, the world seemed to stop. I must have staggered back to my table, because Connie, the fourth person I mentioned, was suddenly beside me, asking if I was all right. I don't know whether I answered her. All I know is that I lifted my shot of tequila, downed it in one swallow, and immediately demanded another as the waitress passed by. I remember drinking 3 more shots of tequila after that, but nothing beyond it. When I came to, I was lying on the couch in Connie's apartment, wrapped in a blanket, my head splitting with pain. On the table next to the couch was a note from Connie. In it, she explained that she had taken me to her place instead of mine because I had asked her not to take me home. She also wrote that she hadn't told my wife, Tracy, that I was with her, again, because I had asked her not to tell Tracy. The note ended by saying that Connie had already left to do what she usually does on Saturdays. I picked up my phone from the table. There were 5 missed calls, all from Tracy. I didn't bother answering any of them. Through the fog in my head, I slowly pieced together what had happened the night before. I had watched my wife having sex with the third participant in our small 4-person arrangement, a man named Brian, my wife's coworker, who, together with Connie, made up our little swinging group. It wasn't as if I hadn't seen them together before. Tracy, Brian, Connie, and I had been doing this together for about 6 months. As had been the case in recent months, Connie didn't join us, so it ended up being just the 3 of us, Tracy, Brian, and me. I had just finished with Tracy when Brian, who had been waiting his turn, immediately took over. Normally, that was the moment when I left the room to get a drink or do something else. I never liked staying to watch my wife enjoy herself with another man, but for some reason, that night I simply walked over to the armchair in the corner of the room and started watching. And that was when I saw it. They changed their pace and movement several times, working in perfect sync, like a well-rehearsed mechanism, that simply couldn't have developed over 6 months of swinging once, maybe twice, a week, plus 1 long weekend. Damn it. They were lovers. And judging by what I saw, they had been for quite some time. I jumped up from the chair, fully intending to hurt someone, but then common sense prevailed. My analytical, engineer's mind kicked in, and instead I simply grabbed my clothes and left the room. After getting dressed in the bathroom, I found Tracy's cell phone and looked up Connie's number. Tracy had never given me Connie's number. She had always handled the arrangements herself, but I needed to speak to Connie face to face. And I needed to do it now. As 4 million thoughts raced through my head, one thing became clear: I needed proof of what I suspected. And if it was true, then I needed a plan. As I left the room, Tracy and Brian didn't stop what they were doing for even a second. I'm not sure they even noticed I was gone. And yes, it was lovemaking. When the swinging first began, it had been sex, simple and straightforward, but very quickly I noticed it had become something more, and that had raised my eyebrows. If my current assessment was correct, then the sex had become a performance meant to allay my suspicions. But before long, they had settled in comfortably enough to be themselves. I called Connie. And we agreed to meet at the Skin Bar around 11 o'clock. She said she was planning to meet friends at the bar around midnight, but that she could talk to me beforehand, provided I was buying. I arrived at the bar about 5 minutes early. It was definitely not my kind of place, but I knew Connie would feel completely at home there. I'm 45, I look reasonably presentable, but I'm just an ordinary married guy. Connie is 25, of average height, with medium-length chestnut hair, cute as a button, and with an incredible body accentuated by a generous bust. Most of the men looked to be between 25 and 35 years old, and judging by the way they were dressed, they were fairly well off. It seemed like the perfect place for a good time, one that might very well end with an exciting night in someone's bed. Connie arrived at 11 o'clock, looking just as stunning as the last time I had seen her, which had been about a month earlier at my place, during one of our swinging nights. She was wearing the proverbial little black dress, unbuttoned 2 buttons down the front to reveal her lethal cleavage, the hem falling only to mid-thigh and showing off her equally lethal legs. I was one of the lucky few who occasionally got to touch her. "What's going on, Freddie?" Connie asked as she sat down at my table. I gave the waitress our drink orders, then looked at this beautiful young woman sitting so casually across from me. "How long have Tracy and Brian been lovers?" I asked, skipping the small talk entirely and getting straight to the point. Connie didn't even blink. She simply looked straight at me and replied, "At least 3 years. That's how long I've been working at the company, and they were already together when I got there." Why? So it wasn't just my imagination. I stayed silent for a few seconds, lost in thought, when Connie suddenly realized why I had asked. "You had no idea, did you?" she said, surprise written all over her face. "And here I was thinking you'd finally given in and were now performing as a trio with Brian. And that I was no longer needed." "Wait. What?" I muttered incoherently. "You weren't needed. I was a distraction, Freddie. Tracy asked me if I wanted to be part of a 4-person arrangement mainly to keep you occupied, so she could spend more time with Brian, right under your nose. And my reward for that was the best lovemaking I'd ever had. Where did you learn to do that?" But since Tracy hadn't called me for about a month, I figured that the two of you had finally worked things out and decided to just have sex as a threesome with Brian. Even though I had already guessed half of the story, I was still stunned by what Connie was telling me. It felt as if someone were punching me in the chest while another person was twisting my guts from the inside. I quickly ordered a shot of cheap tequila, tossed it back in one gulp, and then ordered another. "Tracy and I have been married for 23 years, having tied the knot shortly after graduating from a small Midwestern university. We dated during our last 2 years of school and became exclusive almost immediately. We settled in a Midwestern city, and everything moved along smoothly, mostly good, though sometimes not so good. I'm a banker, she's a paralegal. We have a nice house in the suburbs, and we take vacations from time to time. We raised a wonderful daughter who is now a sophomore at a university in New England. I believed we were in it for the long haul, you know, till death do us part. When Shelley, our daughter, left for college, we became empty nesters. At first, it felt strange. There was no one in the house except the two of us, no more rushing to football games, practices, and the like. But gradually we adjusted and created a new reality, one that included incredible sex about 3 times a week. With the house to ourselves, Tracy felt freer and could truly let go during sex, which she did, becoming more physically expressive and louder in bed. That only pushed me to raise my game to match hers. Sometimes we did this for hours, and when we finally finished, Tracy was as limp as noodles. But just when I thought things were close to perfect, one Saturday evening Tracy came over to me while I was sitting in my lazy boy, climbed onto my outstretched body, and said the 3 words no man ever wants to hear: "We need to talk." Oh, damn, at that moment, my mind began racing, trying to remember what I could possibly have done over the years that was so bad she might want to divorce me, so she could have knocked me over with a feather when she practically whispered in my ear, "I want us to be swingers." I'm sure I let out a deep, audible breath, then looked at Tracy and saw her face turn beet red. Wow. She's serious, I thought to myself. I was speechless, so Tracy decided she'd better fill in the gap. "It's not that you're a bad lover, Freddie, or anything like that. It's just that lately we've been having so much fun in bed. And if you haven't noticed, I seem to be turned on all the time, and you seem to be ready to go all the time. So I thought we could add one more person to it. You know, make it a foursome. Swinging. I suppose this is what they call shock and awe." At that moment, I could barely think straight because of everything swirling around in my head. In the span of 30 seconds, I went from imagining a divorce scenario to my wife asking whether we could start swinging with another couple. So many questions. Tracy reached out to me with her left hand. She seemed disappointed that I hadn't reacted. I was still stuck on "we need to talk." It took me a moment to process it all, then I reacted to her hand faster than my brain reacted to her words. A minute later, she was leading me by the hand into our bedroom, and for the next hour we had sex while she shared bits and pieces of her plan. Tracy wanted to bring another man and another woman into our sex life, and she was confident she already knew who they would be, a couple from her law firm. Brian was a 30-year-old attorney, handsome and in great shape, at least from her point of view, Tracy said, and Connie was a 25-year-old paralegal with a beautiful face and a generous bust, again, in her opinion. She could ask them as soon as we worked out the ground rules together. Wow, baby. I need some time to think about this. I thought everything between us was good, maybe even great, and now you're telling me you need another man for sex. What did I do wrong? I asked. You didn't do anything wrong. In fact, you did everything right. But now I want more, and something different. You can give me more, but it would still be the same, and I want to feel something different. Maybe not more. Maybe not better, though it would be nice if you were at least good. Just different. And don't tell me for a second that the occasional strange thought hasn't crossed your mind. You're a guy, of course it has. I mean, how about a hot young woman with a goddess's body, and my permission to go with it? But you're not planning to bring different people here every week, are you? What about us? I mean, one additional man and one additional woman. Once we both agree on the right couple, she said. It might take some time to find them, but I'm not talking about a whole crowd, and definitely not more than one extra couple. Who do you take me for? And what about us, baby? You and me. I have to tell you, I'm not sure I could handle you being with another man. If we're not both fully on board, this could destroy us. It probably could, she replied thoughtfully. We'll just have to keep talking about everything, like we always do, and choose the best people for us. We just need to keep communicating. I never actually said the word no, so Tracy must have taken that as a yes, because 2 days later she was sitting on top of me in my lazy boy again. Gave me a quick kiss on the lips, and said that on Wednesday night we were inviting Brian and Connie out for drinks. I started to protest, but Tracy shut me up with a hot kiss. That ended the argument. Tracy is a blonde, about 165 centimeters tall, with a beautiful backside and alabaster skin. She doesn't look quite as sexy as she did in her 20s anymore, but she still turns men's heads when she walks into a room, especially when she's dressed to kill. I think she could easily pass for 10 years younger. I don't look as good as Tracy, but I do my best to stay in shape by going to the gym regularly. As a result, my body is in pretty good condition, with no belly or sagging skin. Yes. In the bedroom I've slowed down a bit, so to speak, but I like to think that my attention to detail makes up for it. I have no doubt that I can satisfy Connie. I think the drink did me good. Tracy seemed quite animated, and Brian appeared thrilled with the arrangement. Connie didn't seem opposed, and I did my best to look upbeat. Each of us shared a little about ourselves, just enough to give the others some context. Tracy was completely in her element. Tracy scheduled our first encounter for Saturday evening, and we all agreed. Then we wished them good night. Tracy was full of enthusiasm as we gathered up the glasses and plates with snacks. I stayed quiet, wondering whether I could really go through with this. Finally, as we were heading upstairs to get ready for bed, she noticed that I still hadn't said anything. Are you going to be okay with this, sweetheart? She asked. We won't do it if you can't handle it. I felt completely trapped. I was genuinely uncomfortable, but Tracy was so committed to the idea that I knew refusing would crush her. I nodded in agreement. I couldn't bring myself to say those words. On Thursday, we worked out a set of general rules, the most important being that this was strictly about sex, no emotional involvement was allowed. Another rule was that both of us had to participate in the fun. And finally, no sex in our marital bed, ever. One of us would use the guest room. The other Shelley's old bedroom. There were a few other minor rules, and we agreed that we might come up with more once we got there. We had an agreement, or at least, that's what I thought. Saturday evening began much like Wednesday had, with drinks and snacks after dinner. Tracy and Brian started out sitting next to each other on the couch, and over the next half hour they became almost entwined. Her hands touched his chest, and his left hand moved along her side. Connie and I sat at the kitchen counter, talking quietly, our knees occasionally brushing against each other. About 15 minutes later, Tracy and Brian pressed their lips together, and my stomach churned. A minute or so after that, they stood up from the couch, and Tracy took Brian by the hand and led him toward the stairs. "Tonight we'll use Shelley's room, if you don't mind, sweetheart," Tracy said. I had just started to answer in the affirmative when Connie pressed her lips to mine. Almost reflexively, I closed my eyes, wrapped my arms around her firm body, and returned her enthusiasm. "Then I'll take that as a yes," Tracy said as she and Brian headed up the stairs. After Connie and I broke the kiss, I took her by the hand and led her upstairs to the guest room. To be honest, I was relieved that Tracy had taken Shelley's old room, because the thought of doing this with another woman in my daughter's former bedroom made me uncomfortable. Embracing each other, Connie practically pushed me onto the bed, and within minutes we were both without clothes. Her body was just as beautiful as I had imagined, and she kissed me with genuine enthusiasm. At that moment, I had to admit that I didn't regret what Tracy and I were doing. In fact, I could hear what Tracy and Brian were up to in the next room, but I didn't dwell on it. I was busy with Connie. She was incredible. It wasn't just passion, it was a storm that couldn't be ignored that I barely understood where I was. I just felt the tension subside, leaving behind warmth and emptiness. Damn it. I loved Tracy, and what we had always felt special to me. But this sensation was different, almost unreal. As if I had slipped out of reality for a moment, we lay there side by side, breathing heavily, slowly coming back to ourselves. Time seemed to stand still. After a while, Connie went to the bathroom, and I stayed where I was, staring at the ceiling with a foolish, stunned smile. When she returned, we drew close again, slower now, calmer, as if stretching the moment. Everything unfolded without haste, deeper and quieter, and ended just as naturally as it had begun. Somewhere nearby, muted sounds carried through. Tracy and Brian weren't wasting any time either. I didn't know how long their fun lasted, and I didn't really think about it. When the noise finally faded, Connie and I exchanged a quiet glance and a faint smile. Still catching our breath, I have to admit that although I was skeptical at first, Tracy's idea eventually struck me as wonderful. I could be with my sexy, beautiful wife all week, and on Saturdays welcome a goddess like Connie. Hell yes, I was in. Connie and Brian spent the night with us, and on Sunday morning Tracy made an amazing late brunch after she and Brian had gone for another round. Connie and I followed their example and shared another gentle session of our own before everyone headed downstairs. After they left, Tracy and I retreated to the family room, wearing our robes and sipping coffee. Neither of us seemed particularly upset about what the other had done, and in fact, as we reminisced about the night, we both had smiles on our faces. This went on for the next 5 Saturdays, and each week was just as good as the last. Then, on Wednesday of the following week, when I came home, Brian's car was parked in our driveway. That struck me as a little strange, and when I went inside, he and Tracy were sitting at the kitchen bar, drinking peppermint schnapps. That seemed unusual too, since Tracy rarely drank hard liquor. They told me they were celebrating a bit because the firm, and Brian in particular, had just won an important case. They also wanted to know whether we might celebrate a little ourselves, just the three of us, since Connie couldn't come over on Wednesday evenings. I was a little, let's say, nervous, because I had never done anything like that as a threesome before. But Tracy assured me that she was ready for it and that she would be attentive to both of us. As she said this, she was gently touching me, so it didn't take long for me to agree. With a noticeable spark in her eyes, Tracy slid down from the bar stool, walked over to me, and began helping me undress while Brian watched from the side. Everything happened quickly and confidently, but a moment later she shifted her attention to him. It was clear that the situation had completely swept her up. Watching this turned out to be far more difficult for me than I had expected. For some people, a scene like that might have been exciting, but it made me deeply uncomfortable. I could feel the tension building inside me while my confidence steadily drained away. In the past, it had been easier to cope with moments like this when we were in separate rooms, each in our own space. Here, everything was happening right in front of me. Tracy seemed completely at ease and uninhibited, but when she noticed my withdrawal, she tried to draw me back in. It didn't work. We were close for a short while, yet I knew I was no longer emotionally present. I was struck by how deeply involved she was, and that only intensified my inner discomfort. Before long, I stepped away, deciding I needed a break, and headed to the kitchen to get some water and catch my breath. Even from there, I could hear muted sounds that made it clear the evening was continuing for them. I didn't need to see it, and I was grateful for the distance. After some time, they joined me. Tracy tried to involve me again, gently and in a familiar way, but I already knew I'd had enough for the night. Without Connie, the situation felt completely different. There was simply too much between Tracy and Brian that I found hard to accept. "I think I'm done for tonight," I said calmly. "But don't let me spoil your fun." I went upstairs to our bedroom. For a while, I could hear them talking quietly downstairs, and then the sound of them moving into the guest room. At some point, I must have drifted off. Later, I felt Tracy slip into bed beside me. The evening had clearly gone on longer for her. Brian must have left afterward, and she came to bed. I didn't ask any questions. I suppose I would have to come to terms with the fact that they had done it just the two of them, because if Connie had been there, I would have been busy with her and wouldn't have given much thought to what Tracy and Brian were doing. If something sounds too good to be true, Connie returned on Saturday evening, and everything went back to the new normal. But just 2 weeks later, a new problem emerged, and at the time I didn't have the sense to recognize what it was. Connie and I went downstairs to the kitchen to have a drink after a great session. We were simply catching our breath and mostly exchanging compliments when Tracy and Brian joined us. After a few minutes of giggling and eyeing each other, Brian looked at Tracy and said, "Hey, I've got a 4-day business trip to British Columbia next week. Why don't you come along and cover for me on that, and we can enjoy a 4-day getaway on the Cats, Trujillo, Blanchard route. Great hotel, sightseeing, and a few top-notch restaurants." "That's a fantastic idea, Brian," Tracy replied immediately, without even looking in my direction. "I'm sure Connie wouldn't mind spending Saturday evening alone here with Freddie." "Right, Con." "Not at all. Not at all. We could even make it a little sleepover party, couldn't we, Freddie?" As she answered, Connie was stroking my thigh, and the brain below my waist reacted faster than the one above my shoulders. "Of course," I said, even as a warning bell rang somewhere deep in the back of my mind. I knew she was breaking the rule that we were both supposed to be involved, but she was clearly prepared to let me break that rule with Connie. So, Brian and Tracy were flying to the client's hometown on Thursday, with meetings scheduled for Thursday, Friday, and half of Saturday. They would remain at the law firm for another half day, then fly back on Sunday. I understood perfectly well what that meant. Brian would be with Tracy for all 4 days, while I would at least have Connie with me on Saturday night and Sunday morning. Shortly after that, we all went off to our respective bedrooms to have sex again, so I didn't have a chance to talk to Tracy until we were alone on Sunday morning. We were sitting at the kitchen table, having a late breakfast, when I brought it up. "I thought we agreed that for this to work, we both had to be involved," I began. "You don't seem to remember that at all, and you don't even hesitate before saying yes." Tracy looked surprised. "I don't recall hearing you tell Connie that she couldn't come over on Saturday night because your wife wouldn't be around. Is something going on that I should be worried about?" To say that I stumbled would be an understatement. I could barely force out a response, I was that rattled. Looking back now, I understand that it was a classic case of the best defense is a good offense, but at the time it completely overwhelmed me. I was so busy denying, both to myself and outwardly, that there was anything going on between Connie and me that I couldn't even bring myself to worry about what might be going on between her and Brian. Of course Brian and I will be having sex during that trip. We've never done that before, and I'm not going to spy on you. Brian and I have sex every week, and if you're not there, who else would I be having sex with in British Columbia besides Brian? You don't expect me to find someone new in a new place. Do you? You're not actually excited by that idea, are you? We didn't discuss the trip again, and on Thursday she flew to British Columbia with him. Fortunately, I was busy at work, wrapping up a major project, so I didn't dwell too much on the fact that Tracy would be spending Thursday and Friday with Brian. Still, I knew there was a big lawyers' event scheduled for Friday evening, and I figured I might be able to catch her before they left for it. Since the event was set to start at 7 and was being held at the same hotel where they were staying, I assumed they wouldn't be leaving before then. So I video called Tracy at around 6:45. When she answered, I saw that she wasn't dressed yet. She was wearing a sexy black ruffled bra and panties I had never seen on her before. I assumed she had bought them for the trip, and I felt a surge of excitement wash over me. Tracy and I had barely exchanged greetings when, from somewhere deeper in the room, I heard Brian call out a cheerful hello. I told Tracy that she looked beautiful in her new black lingerie, but before I could add anything else, she moved the phone away. The camera captured only one thing: Brian was far too close to her, so close that any conversation immediately became impossible. I realized this was no longer a dialogue. I couldn't watch what was happening and pretend everything was fine. I simply ended the call without a word. If Tracy had managed to glance at the screen before it went dark, she would have seen that there was neither happiness nor a smile on my face. I didn't call for the rest of the weekend, and Tracy didn't bother calling me either. Connie and I had a sleepover, but she could tell my heart wasn't really in it. I was thinking about Tracy, and Connie called me out on it. What the hell, Freddie? Am I chopped liver or something? I know Tracy isn't here, but I am, and until tonight, I always thought of myself as a pretty hot catch. I didn't come here to feel like second-rate leftovers or anything like that, she said. You're right, Connie. I'm sorry, I backed down. But it's not just because Tracy isn't here. It's because she broke our agreement without giving it a second thought. And then, when I video called her last night, she was too busy fooling around with Brian to actually talk to me. The deal was that she and I were the core of this, and you and Brian were the additions, but right now, I'm not feeling that balance at all. Oh, come on, Freddie. It's the thrill of something new. Cut her some slack. You two were looking for excitement. Well, she's getting it right now. And honestly, I know I'd feel pretty naughty spending the weekend with you, she said. I blushed. Connie probably didn't mean it the way it sounded, but it still felt good to hear. I owed her my best effort, and I decided to give it to her. Quite literally, so I didn't get angry when, on Sunday afternoon, Brian drove Tracy home from the airport. I heard the car pull into the driveway and expected Tracy to come inside within about a minute. When she didn't appear after 2 minutes, I walked over to the front curtain, pulled it aside slightly, and peeked outside. I could see Brian sitting in the driver's seat, but there was no sign of Tracy, until her head suddenly appeared near the steering wheel. Seriously? On the damn driveway, in broad daylight, with God knows how many neighbors around, Tracy's head disappeared just as quickly, and a couple of minutes later I stepped away from the window and went back into the room. About 5 minutes after that, I finally heard Brian's car pull out of the driveway. A minute later, Tracy came into the house, looking not only flushed but with a small trace of dried dirt at the corner of her mouth. I didn't even get up from my chair. I just said, "Hi," gave her a quick wave, and went back to watching the game. She walked over to my chair, clearly expecting me to jump up and hug her. When I didn't move, she leaned down to kiss me on the lips. As she got close to my face, I turned my head aside, raised a hand to stop her, and said, "Whoa. You might want to wipe the dirt off over there first. Tracy straightened up instantly and shot me a wounded look. Really? Tracy. On our damn driveway? Why don't you just tattoo the word adulteress on your forehead? Tracy left me alone for the rest of the evening. I assumed that by the time the game ended, she was already asleep in bed. I slipped in quietly, lay down on my side, and turned away from her. She immediately pressed up against my back, spooning me, and said very softly, "I'm sorry, Freddie. I got carried away. It won't happen again." Strangely enough, it seemed to me that no one on the block had witnessed Tracy's little performance except Mrs. Van Winkle, our nearest neighbor to the west. And since she's an old, irritable woman whom no one really talks to, that probably spared Tracy and me a lot of headaches. Still, she mentioned to me that she had seen it, and she didn't like the fact that I allowed my wife to do something like that with another man, especially on the driveway. I told her I agreed and that I would give my wife a proper scolding. After that weekend, however, the new normal shifted again. Now Brian would come over about every other Wednesday for a threesome. Tracy simply acted as if this were perfectly normal and completely ignored my discomfort. As for me, I made sure that I was with Tracy first, and then she and Brian would finish the evening, always at least twice, sometimes 3 times. But once he touched her, she received none of my attention for the rest of the night. Which meant that she was at least giving something up. The only thing that made Wednesdays bearable was Saturday. Connie was a goddess, and although I didn't love her, the sex with her, on a purely physical level, was better than with Tracy. I could understand how someone might become addicted to something that powerful, enough to destroy their life. The following month went wonderfully. Although I wasn't thrilled about the threesome with Brian, Tracy seemed far more attentive to my feelings, and it felt as though we were back in sync, spiritually speaking. Then Connie couldn't make it one Saturday, and shortly after that, she missed another. It turned out that her mother, who lived a few towns away, was having health problems. What could I say? Suddenly, our swinging turned into regular threesomes, twice a week. And while I wasn't exactly happy about that, Tracy seemed to revel in having all the male attention focused on her. That's how I finally came to see Tracy and Brian's show for what it really was. And then came the meeting with Connie, where she confirmed that instead of being a swinger, Tracy had turned me into a knowing cuckold. After years of my not knowing it at all, I seriously considered suicide. I loved this woman with all my heart for 23 years, tried to give her everything she could possibly want, even agreed to swinging and threesomes because she wanted it. And this is how she treats me. Not only did she have an affair, but she also brought the guy into our lives as a regular player. How they must have laughed about it together. I am the dumbest fool of the year. After a long round of apologies, Connie went back to her friends and left me alone at my table, but not before promising that she wouldn't tell Tracy that I knew about their affair. I ordered another shot of tequila and downed it, spending the entire time thinking about how I might end my life. Then, somewhere in my drunken haze, a moment of clarity appeared. I'm certain that if I'd been able to find a mirror, I would have been grinning like the Grinch just before stealing Christmas. Suicide was a brilliant idea, but not for me. I needed to make someone else do it instead. Yes, I did tell you that this thought came to me while I was completely drunk. By the time Connie came back to the table later that evening, I could barely stand on my feet, but I had already worked out my plan. The next thing I remember is waking up on Connie's couch. When I finally dragged my sorry ass through the door around 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, Tracy was furious, and she probably had every right to be. "You could have died somewhere in an alley, you idiot." She yelled at me. "You disappear on us and then don't answer your phone for hours. If you didn't look like a sack of shit, I might think you were sneaking around with another woman. But you look so bad that no decent woman would agree to be with you." "Bad decision," I muttered, dragging my miserable ass up the stairs and heading for the shower. She didn't say a single word to me for the rest of the day, which was perfectly fine, since I had a hangover the size of a mountain and needed silence and space to think through my plan with a clear head and decide whether it actually made sense. 2 Saturdays later, the 3 of us were relaxing in the kitchen after the first round. I pretended to be extremely tired, but the idea of getting pizza to go still crossed my mind. Tracy asked why we didn't just order delivery. But I pointed out that picking it up would be about half an hour faster. I asked if one of them could go get the order, since I was supposedly so exhausted, and Brian, being the gallant bastard he was, quickly volunteered, not without remarking that the extra rest might allow me to manage a second round that evening. So I grabbed the keys to my brand new Lincoln MKZ from the counter and tossed them to him, saying in a sarcastic tone that he needed to learn how to drive a real car. He took it in stride, waved me off with a friendly gesture, went into the bedroom to get dressed, and headed out the door, calling back, "See you in 20 minutes. 20 minutes came and went, and about an hour later I got dressed and was just about to take Tracy's car to go look for Brian when a police car pulled up at the end of the driveway and 2 officers got out. I stepped outside, with Tracy, who had also gotten dressed, following close behind, and asked, "What's going on, officers? Are you Frederick Arsdell?" The older officer asked, "Yes." "What happened?" I replied, "Mr. Arsdell, there has been an accident involving your vehicle. Your Lincoln MKZ, owned by you but driven by Brian Lichty, ran a stop sign and collided with the side of a semi-truck. The impact killed the driver instantly. Tracy collapsed as if her legs had been cut out from under her and lost consciousness. I rushed to her, scooped her up in my arms, and carried her back into the house, with the officers following. I laid her down on the living room couch and started applying cold compresses. The officers offered to call an ambulance, but I declined, deciding that Tracy had fainted from shock. I managed to bring her around in about a minute, and at that moment she began to sob uncontrollably. I turned to the officers and told them that Brian had been a close friend of ours, and that he and Tracy had worked together for many years and were very close. I explained that I had given Brian the car keys so he could go pick up the pizza. They quickly thanked me for my cooperation, said they would contact me if they needed anything further, and that was the end of it. Tracy was completely shaken by the events of that evening, and I can't say that I blamed her. 90 minutes earlier, she had been having sex with that man with wild passion, and now he was dead. Yes, that's pretty disturbing. I don't think Tracy slept at all that night, so neither did I. Mostly, I just held her while she cried. I didn't shed a single tear, but Tracy was so overwhelmed that she didn't seem to notice. The police called around noon and asked whether they could come by. I agreed, and by 1 o'clock they arrived, a small van, 1 officer, and 2 men from their small forensics unit. They asked if I would mind them searching the house, explaining that it was standard procedure, since it was the last place Brian had been before his death. I wasn't entirely sure I believed that, but I allowed them to search the house anyway. I don't believe in coincidences, so I wasn't surprised when they started the search in the garage and immediately found something. It turned out that there was a sizable puddle of brake fluid on the garage floor where my car had been parked. After asking whether I had known about any brake fluid leak, they collected some of the red liquid in a small, labeled container. Then they looked through my toolbox and pulled out a 6-inch utility knife. After that, the rest of the search was almost routine. At that moment, I realized what their suspicions were. Life goes on, at least for most of us. So 2 weeks later, on a Monday, as I was drinking my second cup of coffee, the police called. Apparently, they were planning to arrest Tracy at her office, and out of courtesy to me, Detective Stavros asked them to call first and let me know that they would be at the police station in about 30 minutes, and that I should be prepared for the worst. He said she was being charged with the murder of Brian Lichty. I rushed to the police station and actually arrived before Tracy and the officers did. She looked completely bewildered when 2 officers and Stavros brought her in, handcuffed. I walked over to Stavros as he headed toward his desk, while the officers made Tracy sit on a chair off to the side. Murder? Really? Tracy? My voice sounded uncertain. I had been practicing that tone on the way over. Stavros gave me his most condescending look, sighed, and explained, "Mr. Arsdell, it appears that your lovely wife tried to kill you, but instead killed her lover. She cut your brake line. You were supposed to go pick up the pizza, not Mr. Lichty. And how do you know she cut the brake line?" I asked in my most prim, I can't believe your serious tone, because our technicians found a severed brake hose at the accident scene, and they found everything else we needed right in your home, a puddle of brake fluid on your garage floor, a knife with brake fluid on it and her fingerprints in your toolbox, and one of her t-shirts with several drops of brake fluid in your laundry hamper. Not to mention several strands of blonde hair stuck to the underside of the car, which we're confident will match your wife's DNA once we process it at the station. That stoked my smug satisfaction just enough to make me smile inwardly. I felt like slapping him on the shoulder and shouting, "Great work." But that would have been far too obvious, so instead I lowered my eyes and murmured, "Oh my God. Tracy, how could you?" One moment, I suddenly blurted out, as if the thought had just occurred to me. "Did you say lover?" "Detective, I have to admit that we're swingers, Tracy and I, Brian, and Connie." Stavros cut me off, once again adopting a rather smug expression, "for the past 2 weeks. We've been very productive. We contacted your wife's employer, obtained a list of the people who work there, and started digging, especially since we couldn't understand why Mr. Lichty was driving your car. It appears that Mr. Lichty and your wife were involved long before she brought you and a certain Connie Battaglia into it. Several of her co-workers suspected the affair, and several others, including the aforementioned Miss Battaglia, knew about it, although no one knew about the swinging, again with the exception of Miss Battaglia. In fact, your wife's boss was so furious that he said if Mr. Lichty hadn't already been dead, he would have killed him himself. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news." Stavros concluded. Tracy, who had listened to all of this in stunned silence, broke down into hysterics at that moment. Freddie. Fredde. She shrieked. "This isn't true. None of this is true. I love you. I would never try to hurt you." I looked at Stavros with my most sorrowful expression. "You don't happen to know the name of a bad lawyer, do you?" I said in a sad, half-joking tone. Epilogue. Despite her protests that she hadn't cut my brake line or tried to kill me, and that she had actually killed Brian by mistake, Tracy was convicted and sentenced to 20 years. I went to court every day and sat in the back without saying a word to anyone. Although I hired her a competent lawyer, the evidence against her was simply too strong. I spoke to Tracy only once after she was convicted, but before she was sentenced. We were given a private visitation room, although since she was now a convicted killer, her hands were cuffed to the table, and a guard stood outside the room. She looked surprised when she saw me walk in. I hadn't answered her calls while she was on trial, hadn't replied to her messages, and I certainly hadn't visited her. Hell, I had barely been polite to her lawyer. Once her surprise faded, she began to smile, until she realized I hadn't come for pleasantries. I didn't even sit down. I simply placed the divorce papers on the table and told her to sign them when she had a moment. Then I turned to leave, and that's it. 24 years, and just go to hell. You had me hook, line, and sinker, you stupid adulteress, I said almost in a whisper. But that wasn't enough for you. You had to go out and find yourself a lover. Then you shoved it in my face, forcing me into a threesome with your lover. Just tell me one thing. Why? Tracy looked at me with tears in her eyes. It all started as just fun, harmless flirting. Then it turned into touching, and even though I knew it was wrong, when we first slept together, it felt magical. It was forbidden fruit, and once I started, I just couldn't stop. And when I brought you into it, it felt like stealing candy from a store when you're a kid. The thrill was incredible, and combined with the sex I was having, the sense of power was like a drug. I could never get enough. But I swear to you, Freddie, by everything sacred, that I never tried to kill you. I don't know where they got all that evidence. I didn't do it. I looked Tracy straight in the eyes, probably giving her the last look she would ever get from me, because I had no intention of ever visiting her again. I know, sweetheart. I know. This story has come to an end, but the question remains, where is the line between trust and self-deception? And can a relationship be saved once the choice has already been made, even in silence? Write in the comments. What would you have done in his place, and why?